Over on Carson's end tune, we have Light Screen to try and mess with those damage calculations a little bit, and Encore to lock Pokemon into a move that maybe is not going to be advantageous going into forward. But one thing's for sure, two high offense teams. We should expect a powerhouse of a match ahead of us, and going right into us, only one person starting off with Tailwind.
Yeah, a big mindset difference here, right? One player leads both Tailwind setters, the other player leads 0, right? So opting for damage with a little bit of control option with Follow Me next to the Golden Go, so you can get quick Make It Rains out and try to punish early passivity from Roaring Moon and Tornadus.
I mean, looking at the fact that already we can see a Tailwind coming out from the Tornadus, you can go ahead and set that up. But if you're not necessarily feeling like you need the speed in this case, that could be a thing. As well, Carson, we don't know what Pokemon he has in the back. And there is sometimes with these Tailwind high offense teams where you want to kind of stagger, get some damage out on the board if you're not feeling too threatened by these Pokemon. Get your opponent to set up the Tailwind and then later on sweep with your own.
Right, you want to, maybe have the second Tailwind and then have it you can match early on and then have some lagging Tailwind ace offset so that you have the advantage by yourself in the third or fourth turn.
Well, Peter, no Tailwind, instead preservation of that Tornadus. And I think when you're staring down this Rock Ogerpon on the opposing end, makes a lot of sense. First off, though, Breaking Swipe. A good amount of damage as well. A crucial attack drop over on the opposing end. Ivy Cudgel not intended for the Tornadus. Instead, good damage into the Roaring Moon, bringing it just down to below half.
Yeah, pretty good damage into both sides right here. A damage trade, no Tailwind immediately. So with no Tailwind led from Carson, Peter recognizes doesn't want to risk Tornadus early on and just have a Tailwind that doesn't have the same impact that Carson's at the end of the game might have, and so opts to get Tornadus out into the back, keep it safe, and meanwhile just try to trade damage with the other side. But Breaking Swipe just isn't that high base power, right? So you can see that even with the mitigation onto Ogerpon, you're not getting quite the same damage back.
The Golden Go had protected on the last turn. It wouldn't be too threatened by a Breaking Swipe, but still gonna go ahead and bring out a Whimsicott, which isn't threatened at all as well. This is Carson's own Tailwind on the team. Spiky Shield from the Ogerpon, not wanting to take any sort of damage from the opposing end. But Knockoff will find a target into the Whimsicott. Of course, not too much damage. Covert Cloak is gone. The follow-up, though, Ivy Cudgel, again, not necessarily the most damage, so Whimsicott gets in quite freely.
Loses half its health, though. That's not nothing. Carson recognizes the risk the Golden Go was under, protects it on the first turn, and then switches it out on the second turn. On the first turn, Peter didn't go after it with Knockoff, get a pretty valuable Breaking Swipe into Ogerpon, but this time it had already protected, so swings into it, gets damage into Whimsicott that could be valuable, and doesn't hit into the Spiky Shield from Ogerpon, so keeps a little bit of health around on the Roaring.
Ogerpon at this point not going to go on the offense anymore. A Follow Me to redirect any sort of hit. Whimsicott, though, Carson finally going to go for the speedy modes that we had talked about with these teams, and the follow-up with the Ivy Cudgel, targeting down into the Ogerpon. A forced hit, of course. Acrobatics, super effective hit into the Whimsicott. No matter how much hit happened last turn, this Acrobatics is going to be enough to pick it off. But now Carson, again, he gets to switch into something that can be capitalizing off of this Tailwind.
Right. Sometimes this is exactly what you want. For Whimsicott to use Tailwind and then immediately get knocked out means that you have the full turns of that. On the other hand, Peter now has a dwindling number of Tailwind turns on Carson's side and his own Tailwind setter in the back. That means if he can get past these Tailwinds, either by matching early on or just by lasting through them, he can have unanswered Tailwind from Tornadus later on.
Looking down at this, though, Urshifu hitting the field, how does this change things? Because, again, this Ogerpon still has that redirection. Yeah,
Ogerpon hasn't terrestrialized, has water absorbed, could just redirect to Surging Strikes, makes it really risky to go for. On the other hand, Close Combat has two good targets on the other side. Likely two KOs, you also have the speed advantage, there's no Tailwind yet. So Urshifu's going to be swinging out with a giant Close Combat. You'd love to imagine just bringing Tornadus safely into that without finding Ivy Cudgel at the same time, being able to match Tailwind, but it's a big risk to do that because if you lose Tornadus on the switch, it could be devastating.
We will see a switch, though, but recognizing that a Tornadus switching could be devastating, Fluttermane instead, which of course would be immune to any sort of close combat. Terastallization from the opposing end, though, coming on out, it will be with this Urshifu. So this one will be into the Steel Terastallization type, going to be dropping any weakness to something like an Acrobatics going on forward, and should fare quite well against a Fluttermane down the line. First hit, though, Ivy Cudgel into the Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon doesn't even have the opportunity for an attack. Follow-up, Fluttermane hits the field. If it is a close combat, it does absolutely nothing. So sure, one free switch, but you do lose a Pokemon on the turn.
right? Roaring Moon, despite the booster, is slower than the Tailwind on the other side. We'd already seen the -1 Ivy Cudgel do 50% of the Roaring Moon, and Roaring Moon has no defensive Terrestrialization to help with that because it's a flying Terrestrialization, would have just made it super effective. Like you mentioned, the Steel Terrestrialization could have been useful on just that turn to prevent grass offense or flying offense, but it's also going to be helpful against fairy offense. So just a really stable defensive Terrestrialization in this matchup. That means the threat of Tailwind plus Dazzling Gleam or Moonblast and Flutter Mane is not nearly as devastating. This is again one of those situations where Follow Me could be really helpful. If you're worried about damage into Urshifu on this turn, something like Specs Shadow Ball trying to get that KO, if you can redirect it for a turn and get a Surging Strikes into Flutter Mane, well then you're really starting to break down all of the offense that Peter has available.
Well, we saw Terrestrialization from Carson on the last turn. Now it's time to get Terrestrialization going for Peter, with the Tornadus also going to be able to steal Terrestrialization. So again, looking when you're staring down this Ivy Cudgel from Carson, not trying to take a super effective hit there. Ogerpon, though, just more so on the defensive, not necessarily wanting any smoke this turn around. Peter, without having that speed advantage, does kind of have to go for the Tailwind to put himself on even footing going on forward. And the Shadow Ball Flutter Mane is going to be the faster of the targets, but not enough even with that Choice Specs to get this KO. Now we get to see the offensive going out, and Terrestrialization may be good up against the Ivy Cudgels. Surging Strikes doesn't look good, but will survive through the turn.
Crucial for Peter that Tornadus hangs on there, doesn't knock him down to just 2 Pokemon. The defensive Terrestrialization from Tornadus is meant for Ogerpon and that Ivy Cudgel, but Ogerpon just protects itself through this turn. But Peter doesn't also fall for the target, doesn't throw a Shadow Ball into that slot, and so he gets really good damage into Urshifu, and will now have Flutter Mane moving first on the next turn. But again, this is where the Follow Me can be useful. You kind of get your choice of which of these Pokemon should attack, because I don't think Tornadus is likely to be able to pick up either KO.
Yeah, especially too with that Terrestrialization, and Tornadus, sometimes it can hit decently
it's
well,
close.
but
It's close to being able to pick up the KOs. We're going to have to see. For now, Ogerpon, though, just going out into the back, wants to be preserved, maybe useful for closing out against the Ogerpon on the other side at the end of the game, because Golden Go's going to have a much harder time doing that.
I mean, depending on where the Shadow Ball target is, though, that's going to be the thing. And if it wasn't targeted for the Urshifu, the Golden Go get in free, but Golden Go switches in on a Choice Spec Shadow Ball, and just going to be the one-hit KO. Follow-up single target. If it was close before, it definitely isn't now. Urshifu's going to drop a double KO for Peter on the turn. That's how quickly these matches can just completely turn on its head.
Yeah, once the speed advantage gets in one side, we talked about it before the game, that the Flutter Mane could be a problem, because when the Tailwinds are matched, it is the fastest thing. It's faster than Golden Go, faster than Ogerpon, faster than Urshifu, and that's the advantage that Peter leaned on to win this game, right? This is over now. Shadow Ball from Flutter Mane should just be able to pick up the KO on Ogerpon here. So yeah, using that advantage of the Flutter Mane and really pushing offense with Shadow Ball.
Yep. Taunt Ogerpon, regardless, is going to have to eat this Shadow Ball on this turn. Choice Specs, Ogerpon goes down. Peter Chen to take the first game in the set. And really well done. I mean, starting out, you're staring down these Pokemon could deal so much damage, but kind of just play it safe, preserve your Tailwind, bring it in later, and that Flutter Mane, again, used to such great effect.
I think one crucial turn in there is where the Surging Strikes target went into the Steel-type Tornadus. It missed that KO, which was impactful, but also that could have been into Flutter Mane. Even if the Flutter Mane is bulky enough to withstand that, you're at least threatening an Aqua Jet. This suppresses Shadow Balls on future turns. Whereas because the Flutter Mane stayed at full health, there was nothing to stop this rampage of Shadow Balls afterwards. You know, Carson may have been worried that an Ogerpon switch could have happened into the Flutter Mane slot, and that would have been devastating as well if you just wasted Surging Strikes on the turn. But I think that's a really pivotal moment there. With two teams that are so high octane, kind of one turn of targeting that doesn't get you the value that you need can be really impactful.
Well, it's even one turn of targeting, you don't get what you need, but that's also where we saw Carson spiky shield with the Ogerpon to make sure it wasn't taking that Shadow Ball, right? And even if we got to see the defensive Terrestrialization from the Tornadus, 3 HP Ivy Cudgel, that's going to be fine, right? So getting that one turn wrong, thinking that it's going to be the target, and instead Peter going for the other Pokemon. Tornadus was always going to Tailwind there, and you just get the 50-50 with the Flutter Mane wrong. So little kind of things along the way that make the biggest impact.
Exactly, and I'm not even sure that if Surging Strikes had KO'd Tornadus, that's necessarily ideal for Carson either. That just puts Ogerpon on the field where it can redirect for itself, and can also threaten fast damage with Ivy Cudgel, probably faster than Urshifu or Golden Go. And so, you know, at that point, Flutter Mane was the big problem, and you have to make the decision of whether you think you have the opportunity at the moment to swing into it, and one big missed opportunity there.
And going into game number 2, last time we saw Peter with the only one leading with a Tailwind option, but now we've kind of flipped it around. Carson's going to be leading the Whimsicott, so right away offering a Tailwind pressure with a powerful Ivy Cudgel, and Peter instead Roaring Moon and his own Ogerpon.
Yeah, no Tailwind on this Roaring Moon, so one-sided Tailwind from Carson's side with Whimsicott, but a Whimsicott that's under threat. If you don't want to use a Terastallization, then you're risking trading a Tailwind for an Acrobatics that just KOs Whimsicott. Ogerpon can't take a KO on probably either of these Pokemon with even with a crit Ivy Cudgel, it might be close. And so that might not be a damage trade that's worthwhile, because if that happens, you trade Whimsicott for a Tailwind, but then Tornadus just comes out in the future and matches Tailwind, then it isn't necessarily a worthwhile trade. You'd much rather have Whimsicott around for possibly 2 Tailwinds, or to threaten Encore and Moonblast, these kinds of other supportive options.
It's going to stick around and no Terastallization. I mean, even if it did, it would just be so susceptible to being hit from this Ogerpon. But a Protect from the Roaring Moon, a Spiky Shield from Carson's Ogerpon, and a Whimsicott that goes for a Tailwind. So not being targeted down by the Roaring Moon, will be able to get that up for free. And Hornleech targeting into this Ogerpon instead hits into the Spiky Shield, and it's just going to be that little bit of recoil damage. So no damage done onto Carson's end of the board, and he gets that Tailwind up without having to trade his Whimsicott.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting turn. Roaring Moon protects itself. Must have been worried about Acrobatics, or that the Whimsicott just goes out on the offense with Moonblast, so protects itself through that turn. Right now, it doesn't have to worry about Encore into that Protect, because as a Dark type, it's immune to Prankster, but if it were to risk a Terastallization, that could be a problem as well. And then meanwhile, Ogerpon must have thought it was going to be hit by an Ivy Cudgel, because Hornleech is less damage than Ivy Cudgel and walks you into the recoil, but you're maybe hoping to get a little bit of recovery back. Instead, just takes some recoil from the Spiky Shield.
Going out on the offense now, Carson has the speed, and Roaring Moon takes so much damage. The follow-up Acrobatics Whimsicott is able to hang on through that and can follow up with a Moonblast of its own. The double up in the Roaring Moon is enough for the KO. Now, Peter, just with the Ogerpon on the field, does get its choice of targets to fire off an attack into, and again, the Hornleech into the Ogerpon. We'll be able to bring it up to full and deal a significant amount of damage into that Pokemon.
Peter really prioritizing damage into Ogerpon, wants to get Hornleech there. That could have maybe been an Ivy Cudgel that followed up and picked up the KO onto Whimsicott. Meanwhile, it was good speed relationship for Peter's side that the Whimsicott in Tailwind didn't end up faster than the booster speed Roaring Moon, or else Roaring Moon wouldn't have even gotten an attack off on that turn, so we learn one speed relationship there, but also without being willing to commit the flying Terastallization, Acrobatics isn't enough damage to pick up the KO on Whimsicott. That can mean now with 2 turns of Whimsicott's Tailwind gone, maybe you think about getting Whimsicott out into the back so that you can have a second Tailwind in the future that prevents a one-sided offset Tailwind from this Tornadus from being devastating in the end of the game. But if you do that, then you're kind of wasting the last couple turns of this Tailwind. So a really important decision here of what you do with Whimsicott at this point. But yeah, no switches. Whimsicott going to just stay on the field.
It sticks around. Both Pokemon on Carson's end of the field don't have the most amount of health. Terastallization from Peter, again, the defensive onto the Tornadus. When you're staring down a Rock type, this is just going to work so well, and even is going to help up against this Moonblast. Ogerpon, that's going to be the Spiky Shield. We get to see this Tornadus, it can try and go for a setup, or it could go out on offense. Offense with that light screen means this Bleakwind Storm is going to do less. Ogerpon does try and target down into the Spiky Shielded Mon, so not going to do any damage, and now only Peter gets to attack. Light screen, not enough to save the Whimsicott, but is good to make sure this Ogerpon sticks around for another turn.
Light Screen helps mitigate that Bleakwind Storm, but maybe more importantly, if you expect the last Pokemon from Peter as the Fluttermane, the Light Screen is going to do a lot to mitigate the damage from the Fluttermane, but it's going to be a big problem regardless. If Regidrago is what you're leaning on for offense, going to have a hard time doing big damage to Fluttermane, is going to be extremely vulnerable to it, even in Light Screen. Meanwhile, the defensive Terastallization from Tornadus is so strong there that it gives Tornadus time to not immediately have to go for a Tailwind. Can go out on the offense with Bleakwind Storm and can just go for the Tailwind in the future, knowing that you weren't really risking Tornadus at all on that last turn. And still, the Earth Power from Regidrago is the only major risk there, but you can threaten a redirection away with Follow Me, and that's just not that much total damage coming out if that's what Carson opts into.
And last turn, we saw that Bleakwind Storm. Finally, we'll get to see the Tailwind, which is going to be sticking around for much longer than any speed control on Carson's end. Now, Ivy Cudgel for Ivy Cudgel. The last hit from Peter to take a second KO within this match. Bring Carson down to only 2 Pokemon. Regidrago has been left alone on this turn. Full HP, Dragon Energy. Ogerpon gets dropped. But again, Terastallization, big for this Tornadus, puts it to around half. Both trainers at 2 Pokemon apiece.
both trainers down to 2 Pokemon after that damage trade, and 2 things really helped that damage trade for Peter. The first is the defensive Terastallization. That means you don't give up Tornadus to the Dragon Energy that you let out. The second is the speed relationship between Ogerpon and Regidrago. If Regidrago had moved first and matched Tailwinds and had just KO'd Ogerpon, then you don't get that Ivy Cudgel KO. But because Ogerpon's faster, swings out and you just get an exchanged set of KOs. Meanwhile, Fluttermane looks very good here. With matched Tailwinds, it can swing out against both of these Pokemon, but no Terastallization used from Carson's side yet means that defensive Terastallization, the Steel on Urshifu is available and can buy time for big Surging Strikes, and you don't have to worry about Ogerpon anymore. You get rid of it on the last turn, so you're free and clear. But for now, just Detecting wants to keep it safe and see what Regidrago can do.
Well, especially too when it is a choice-locked Fluttermane on the opposing end, you get to see what move of choice it's going to be. Shadow Ball and Urshifu with the Protect. That's a wasted turn from the Fluttermane. Follow up from this Tornadus. Bleak Wind Storm is good to start dropping down the HP on this Regidrago. No more Dragon Energy though. Instead, super effective hit into the Steel type Tornadus. It's going to be Fluttermane in a 1v2, and the amount of damage that can come out, and it's locked into Shadow Ball. It's locked into Shadow Ball, and there's Light Screen up on the other side. This should be a clean win for Carson at this point, and you can see the threat of that defensive Terastallization. Fluttermane unwilling to lock into a Fairy move because it knows it might have to fight against the Steel Urshifu. Instead, has to lock into Shadow Ball, which just means single target damage, not much damage into either of these Pokemon, and it's just going to be, I think, too little too late. We should see Surging Strikes and Earth Power coming into Fluttermane on this turn and picking up a KO. A last little Terastallization on the match, but yeah, this 2v1, as you said, just the combination of attacks should be good. Aqua Jet instead drops Fluttermane to about half. Terastallization, Shadow Ball into it. Not going to be nearly enough into this Urshifu, but the follow-up, the Earth Power. All right, still not quite there. So we'll run it back for one more, but the Aqua Jet will be able to get it. Yeah, the Aqua Jet kind of safe there because you don't worry about a critical hit. Shadow Ball, like, you've at least gotten some damage on that turn. And then if you don't get critical hit, you can just Aqua Jet the next turn and pick up the KO. So just a way to mitigate some of the risk in that end of the game and pick up game 2 for Carson and move us into the final game. That end game, when it's the 2v2, normally when it's a Fluttermane staring down this Urshifu and this Regidrago, one of those just on paper, it looks so good. It looks so locked. Peter has a speed advantage. He has a Pokemon that has a super effective button into both of those. But Carson, I mean, Terastallization till the end, a Smart Detect, like, was able to close it out. Like, that was so nice at the end. Right, having the Terastallization preserved meant that they kind of turned the tables on that normal matchup. And the reason that happened is that the damage trades kind of resolved too quickly. It got down to just to that 2v2, whereas in game 1, Fluttermane hit the field a little bit sooner, and with an advantage already from Peter's side, that meant it had time to Shadow Ball several times instead of being kind of up against the wall and very quickly down to being the last Pokemon. I think in game 3, might be a reasonable adjustment for Peter to try to get Fluttermane out on the field much earlier. There's not a ton that can punish it early. Like, you can fight against the Whimsicott, you can fight against the Urshifu if you still have Ogerpon to support as well. And so if you can get Fluttermane out and threatening damage earlier, then you maybe don't risk leaving on an island like in that game 2. So then, what are some other adjustments we can see going into this game 3? Because we got to see a Pokemon switch up coming out from Carson that worked out so well. But what about on Peter's end? Other than just Fluttermane coming out sooner, will we see a Pokemon switch or just a gameplay switch? Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It doesn't feel like the other Pokemon, Incineroar and Glimmora, have a great matchup here, so I'd expect it to be the same 4, maybe just in a different order. We're back to the pairing from game 1 that won game 1 for Peter. But remember, of course, on that game 1, Tornadus just immediately switched out. So it wasn't that these two Pokemon fought right away. I mean, that game 1, too, we saw Carson without any sort of Tailwind in the lead. Now both trainers in this Tailwind matchup have their Tailwinder out to start. Yeah, this is the first time that on turn 1 we've seen both Prankster Tailwind Pokemon on the field, but we still also have a lot of damage threatened here. The Ivy Cudgel is a threat into the Tornadus, the Moonblast is a threat into Roaring Moon, and Acrobatics could get you away from Moonblast while also letting you swing out with a ton of damage. And so this is that situation where you have to kind of decide, are we just matching Tailwinds here? Am I letting my opponent have Tailwinds so that I can swing out on the offensive? How worried am I about my opponent swinging out on the offensive? I think either player, if they manage to kind of preserve their Tailwind setter while taking a KO this turn and then having offset Tailwind, that's probably a big advantage. So I think both players have to be a little bit worried about it. I think, too, going into this, we saw how pivotal Terastallization, especially for Carson, was in that game number 2. So if it's going to be spent here, that is going to be Pokemon maybe weak to Fluttermane down the line. But on this turn, Tornadus knows that this worked out fairly well within the series, and you cannot go drop. So yeah, Terrestrialization, only one end. Whimsicott sets up a Tailwind, and none to match. So these are going to be staggered. So much damage into the Roaring Moon, but the Acrobatics firing back will bring this Whimsicott down low. Icy Wind, that's going to be the follow-up. So offense to make sure the Tailwind setter on Carson's end goes down. And Ogerpon also gets speed dropped. So now when you set up your Tailwind, that Ogerpon's still going to be reduced.
Speed is dropped, sturdy is broken. This is exactly the kind of one-sided KO that I was talking about, because nothing stops, matching the Tailwind on the next turn. So you don't ever really get any turns with Tailwind advantage, and meanwhile you've lost a Pokemon. No real surprise to see Tornadus go for the Terrestrialization. For both players, those Steel Terrestrializations seem like the most stable defensive one. I would be not surprised to see Urshifu immediately go for it if it doesn't protect on this turn. You've got to worry about Acrobatics and Bleak Windstorm from the other side. Meanwhile, Ogerpon has to do a lot of the work for offense here, clean up the KO on this Roaring Moon, but this is where that defensive Terrestrialization for Tornadus comes in. If you don't throw a Surging Strikes there, then you're not going to be getting that KO anytime soon.
And with the Tornadus, it was Icy Wind last turn, but staring out the threat of these Pokemon, sure, you have the Terrestrialization, but a double up still could be disastrous. So kind of one of those, if you don't do it now, you might not get that chance.
Right, you don't want to wish that you'd gone for the Tailwind after you just lose a Pokemon. So probably expect Peter to get the Tailwind while you can have it now if you're not going to do something else to protect the Tornadus.
And you had highlighted how strong the Steel Terrestrialization was type-wise in this match. So to see the Urshifu go for it now on this turn makes a lot of sense. Acrobatics threatens you. If it was going to be a Bleak Wind, that's going to be super threatening. So Terrestrialization for one and Spiky Shield for the other. But Tornadus, get the Tailwind while you can. Now the Tailwinds are going to be staggered by one turn. So when we get down the line, Peter should have a little bit of an advantage. Breaking Swipe does nothing into this Ogerpon. A little bit of recoil into the Roaring Moon, and to the Urshifu, not much damage at all. Of course, this means with the attack drop, it'll only be noticeable for the close combats, but going into the Tornadus, still a super effective hit. Feels like it has its full attack. Tornadus goes down.
Yeah, Peter may be hoping that a Breaking Swipe was enough to keep Tornadus around, but a super effective close combat is a ton of damage. Just cleanly picks that up into Tornadus. So you got the Tailwind up though, and again, this is sometimes the exact situation you want for your Prankster Tailwind Pokemon to click Tailwind, get KO'd, and get replaced by something that's a bigger threat, or in this case, more of a defensive backbone. Ogerpon doesn't mind fighting against this Urshifu when he can redirect water moves into Water Absorb, and also with -1 attack, maybe -2 attack. By the time that the Urshifu actually gets to move, you're much less worried about close combat. Meanwhile, Ogerpon Roaring Moon Regular is quite low. The -1 attack probably helps you take an Aqua Jet here, but you maybe have to be a little bit worried. You're going to be thinking about what if that's the play my opponent makes. Like, am I still happy? You don't want to lose Roaring Moon expecting that it would have attacked this turn. And I think we saw in the back, it's still Flutter Mane, so you still have to also be, from Carson's side, worried about how you eventually deal with that Pokemon, knowing that you won't ever have a Tailwind advantage against it.
Especially, too, with the fourth Pokemon on Carson's team being something that wouldn't appreciate the Flutter Mane at all. Got to be so aware. Urshifu not looking to get dropped, but the Regidrago, since it is a Breaking Swipe on the opposing end, instantly is going to be taking down to half of its damage. Of course, the attack drop doesn't matter, but that's going to be a double up into the slot. Regidrago, it sticks around, but on so little health, and the only moves it'll be able to go for are like the Draco Meteor or the Earth Power.
It won't be able to go for anything, right? Breaking Swipe is going to inevitably come out. It's going to be the first thing to move. So unless that Aqua Jet is enough damage, it's going to clean that up. And you can see the Regidrago is just so non-valuable that it's mostly being disposed of. Oh, it is enough.
It is. Oh, right. Not very effective. -1 attack. But Aqua Jet is enough to take down the KO. So that is going to be a big knockout.
Ivy Cudgel doesn't go into Draco.
No, instead targets down the Urshifu. So Regidrago sticks around. Ivy Cudgel's not enough. Critical hit from the Draco Meteor knocks down this Ogerpon. And all of a sudden, it's only one Pokemon left for Peter.
Okay, but is it one Pokemon that's going to just do plenty? What stops Dazzling Gleam from just sweeping this game? Urshifu's not going to stop it. Urshifu, that Steel Terrestrialization was really useful, but Urshifu's health is way too low for that to be relevant now. Regidrago wouldn't be able to take a Dazzling Gleam even if it was probably at full health. Meanwhile, the Ogerpon in the back, that's your hope. It's going to have to take Dazzling Gleam and get an Ivy Cudgel back.
Okay, well, we got the Detect on this turn. Of course, the speed interactions with Flutter Mane is so fast. And Moonblast instead, no lock into the Dazzling Gleam. It's only going to be these single targets, which opens up this opportunity for Regidrago to attack. Not too much into the Flutter Mane, but again, it's going to be the fact it's locked into just a single target move. And Carson still has 2 Pokemon now that the Life Orb is taken care of 1.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like this probably wraps it up, right? Because you don't even have to to risk that Ivy Cudgel is enough damage here, because you can just follow me on this turn, take the Moonblast into Ogerpon, Surging Strikes for the Flutter Mane, and pick up the win that way. Carson should have it now.
Yeah, and as you said, that follow me. Now Flutter Mane is forced to target down into this Pokemon. Ogerpon gets dropped, but the Urshifu sticks around. And when you have something like this Surging Strikes to be dealing out this damage, you get 3 hits of the critical damage. Flutter Mane was already taking some damage. 2 hits is enough. And Carson St. Denis to take the set 2-1 here in Seattle.
Well, it's not often that it feels like the unlikely thing that the player up 3-1